it's just different. And I think part of living abroad for me has been understanding those differences and appreciating those differences and just kind of rolling with those differences depending on which country I'm in at the moment. What is good, everyone? Welcome to the channel. My name is Paul and I make videos about Japanese society, life, and culture from the viewpoint of a long-term foreign resident. I've been here for 18 years. And today I'm going to take on a video topic that I've seen a number of foreign country living YouTubers take on, which is how my perspectives of my home country, the United States, have changed since living abroad for so long. And honestly, when I undertook this topic to begin with, it actually took me a while to think about it because I didn't want to get into topics of like reverse culture shock or things like that, because I've talked about that sort of thing on the channel before, and I feel like that's different than actual full-on perspective change based on what I've seen and experienced living in Japan. But after thinking about it for a bit, I came up with a list of things that I feel I can talk about that have really changed in my mind about the US. But the first thing I want to start with is actually a caveat, which is one thing I've noticed about living abroad is that the perspective you get of your home country while you are abroad is vastly different from the reality. I've had this experience again and again where I went back to the States and I thought that things were going to really be different, and that the news and what I was seeing on social media were telling me that, you know, this was happening and this was really big in the US, etc. And then once I was back in the States and just on the ground, so to speak, I realized, yeah, not really. Not much has really changed. You can have your perspective skewed quite a bit living abroad, and you really do have to go back to, you know, your home country to kind of rebalance or recalibrate yourself and your understanding of your home country versus your new country, because you lose perspective when you're living abroad, and that's just a fact of things. Now, the first thing I would say that actually has changed in regards to my perspective is safety. And I mean this in a couple of different ways. First of all, if you always hear Japanese talk about America, you'll think that America is an incredibly dangerous place. And there is that image from the news with guns and robberies and gangs and everything else. But the truth is, that's going to really depend on where you come from. I go back to the US and I never feel unsafe or more unsafe than I do when I'm in Japan. The one exception being that you have to be a little more careful with your belongings, because you can't just leave your bag on a table to reserve it for you while you go order your food or your drink, etc., which in Japan you can do that. In the US, yeah, there's a fair chance that someone's going to snatch it and run away with it. So that's one aspect of safety. But actually personal, like, injury or that sort of thing, no, I don't fear for my safety when I'm in the States as much as you might be led to think you might be after living abroad for a long time and getting this idea that, you know, the US has become really dangerous. Now, obviously Japan is well known as being an incredibly safe country, but the other side of this whole safety issue is how safety conscious Japan is, to the point of obsession. And that is, there's announcements everywhere, there's signage everywhere, there's always this kind of extra mile that's taken to ensure safety and that everyone feels like they're going through life in as little danger as possible. That's why you have so many announcements in train stations, announcements on buses, signs on the street. Like, one of the huge differences you'll see is construction sites. Construction sites on the road in Japan, the number of lights and cones and people they have out there with light sticks waving at you so you know you go the right way, etc. It's a huge difference compared to in the US, where they just put a few orange barrels out and there aren't any actual personnel who are showing you the way to go. You just kind of have to figure it out. And that's a big difference that I've come to really notice between Japan and the States, which is it's not just that Japan is safer, the actual steps that are taken towards safety consciousness and safety awareness are so much greater here. Some of them I honestly wonder how necessary they are. I mean, I think of Japan as being not a litigious place, like people aren't suing other people for lack of safety, yet companies really take it on themselves to put up this front of everything safe, 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 and please pay attention to where you're walking and pay attention to this, that, and the other thing through their signage and announcements. And also something that's always stood out to me as interesting is Japan is a country of barred windows on the first floor. I think of this as a country where theft and robbery and break-ins are far, far less likely than the US, but they also take certain burglary prevention steps here that you don't usually see, at least not in my hometown in the US. You'd be hard-pressed to find a house where I come from that has barred windows on the ground floor, whereas it's actually a fairly common thing here. And I just always have kind of wondered that, why it's seen as necessary. Put another way, I would say that the way my perspective has changed is that while America is ostensibly the potentially more dangerous country, it seems far less obsessed with safety than maybe it should be. As in, Americans seem to pride themselves on being like keeping open and free and not wanting to be burdened by constant safety announcements and signage and everything else, like let us take care of ourselves sort of ethic. And that begins to stand out when you realize how Japan kind of blankets you with this everything be safe, and look at how we're trying to be safe. And there's a noted absence of that in the States. So I guess I've come to see America as being really unconcerned with safety in a way that is really interesting and kind of counterintuitive. And those constant safety announcements that happen in Japan leads me to my second point, which is one way I've changed my mind about the US is I've realized how quiet it is. It's so quiet compared to Japan. Now, you might not get that impression as I'm walking around this really quiet neighborhood that I'm in right now, but overall, the population density in Japan just makes for a place that is much more noisy, and shops all have their shop jingles that play when you go inside the door, etc. And you have all of the safety announcements, as I mentioned, and you have the political trucks that go around announcing at election time who you should vote for. And basically, even just the "irashaimase" that people yell at as you enter a shop or a restaurant, there's a lot more kind of ambient, ubiquitous noise in Japan. There's more scooters. A lot of the times, if you see a cut in my videos where obviously I've cut a piece of the video out editing, it's usually because a scooter drove by me, and those things are so loud compared to cars. They just go across the screen, and so I find myself having to cut that out because the sound is terrible. So in general, America just seems so much more peaceful than Japan because of the lack of noise, and just, people are more spread out. Now, of course, if you're in New York City, you're going to be like, what is he talking about? But I'm not from New York City, so as a change of perspective, I've never thought of America as being a quiet place, but compared to Japan, it most definitely is. Now, one item that is mentioned in a lot of these YouTuber videos about how their perspective of the US has changed after living abroad is healthcare. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that was one for me as well. Clearly, the US needs a better healthcare system. It needs something that covers people in general far more effectively than what exists now. And one of the biggest problems is the fact that you even need insurance to pay for anything in the US. I came here on vacation once when I was living back in the States, and I hurt my knee, and I went to the clinic, saw a doctor, got an x-ray, was prescribed some pain medication, and the entire thing, clinic visit, doctor, x-ray, medicine, cost less than $80. And I didn't have insurance, which tells you that, costs are kept low. People are charged fairly even if they don't have insurance. And of course, you are required to have insurance if you live in Japan. and it's provided through national healthcare system, which everyone has to be enrolled in. And I'm not going to say that national healthcare systems are perfect, nor will I say that Japan's is perfect, but the benefits it brings far outweigh the problems with it. And the US just needs to get on board with some kind of change of the system. But as long as the drug companies and the insurance companies rule the roost there, I don't see when and how that's going to change. But absolutely, living abroad has made me see how ridiculous the US system is. And finally, the last one I'll leave you with is how I've come to perceive convenience in a different way. Because Americans and Japanese definitely perceive convenience differently in a couple of different manners. And the first is where to live and how to get about. For the Japanese, living close to the bus station, living close to the train station, that's what's convenient. In America, obviously, having a car and driving a car everywhere is the US version of convenience. And that's a pretty obvious difference. For me, though, since I've still mostly lived in more countryside areas, even now in Yokohama, I don't live in the city. I still live in a place where a car is necessary to get about and go shopping, etc. But for millions of Japanese, living close to the station is their version of convenience. Now, one version of convenience that I miss about the States is the fact that so many things stay open later. I mean, Japan famously has all of its trains stop right around midnight, so you can't ride the train anywhere past a certain time, and you're basically forced to take a taxi in those instances. Stores that are open far less, like banks being the primary example. Banks in Japan close at 3 p.m., which I don't know how working people manage that. It seems really tough. Of course, people come to Japan and marvel about the convenience stores, and I think the convenience stores exist for that reason. You can't go to the bank when it's open, so you gotta hit the convenience store ATM. You can't get tickets in the evening at any ticket booth. It's going to be closed, so you have to buy them through the convenience store system. All of these things that the convenience store provides is very often because nothing else is open to provide it for you. So that's definitely, I mean, convenience stores are awesome, as we all know, but there's a lot of things that are inconvenience stores in Japan because of the times that they keep. But here's the thing, as you're listening to these, you're probably thinking these are kind of superficial reasons, like, wow, he hasn't really had some kind of sweeping change of thought about his home country. And the truth of it is because I haven't. Like, every time I go back and I interact with my friends and my family and I travel around my hometown, I find myself thinking that while some stores have changed and some buildings have disappeared and new ones have been built, nothing has really changed. And I just kind of meld back into my Americanness in American society. And then when I return to Japan, I meld back into my Japaneseness in Japanese society. And they're just two different things. And I can't say that Japan has changed me greatly in terms of my views of my home country outside of the things that I've just talked about. Could be that I'm forgetting something big that I wasn't able to come up this week while I was brainstorming this topic, but I don't think so. I just think that the main point I want to get across is that your perspective will change just by virtue of living abroad, but I don't feel like there were a ton of things that I was so wrong about America, or I was so wrong about this, and Japan does this so much better or so much worse or whatever. It's just different. And I think part of living abroad for me has been understanding those differences and appreciating those differences and just kind of rolling with those differences depending on which country I'm in at the moment. And so this idea that it's made some kind of sweeping change in my character is, well, it's just not the case. So I don't know. How about you? Do you live abroad? How have your perspectives changed? Has it been more of a deep change than what I'm describing here? Let us know in the comments below. At any rate, I thank you very much for watching this particular video, and I hope you check out my other content on my channel. I will catch you on the next one. Peace.